Hey everybody, it's Miss M, and today we're going to learn about a thing called the quadratic formula. So this whole time we've been talking about quadratic equations, and now we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. So I wanted to quickly review what is the quadratic equation. So remember, a quadratic equation is in this form: a x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, it's quadratic because we have our squared. This is the standard form where we have our squared and then our x term to the power of 1 and then our term with no x. It's an equation because it's equal to 0. Remember, equations always have an equal sign, and we want to have our quadratic equation set equal to 0. Now, we've been working for the past couple weeks with this. We've learned how to solve by factoring. We've learned how to solve by the root method if there's only one x term. But today we're going to learn something that works in every situation, and that's the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is not the most efficient way, and it's not necessarily the fastest way, but it works every time. So if you can see that the problem is able to be factored, or you can see that it only has one x term, you should probably use the factoring method or the isolation, the root method. But if it looks like you can't do either of those things, the quadratic formula will always work. And the quadratic formula is kind of a confusing formula, but it's really important. It's one of the most important terms in algebra that you will learn and use. And so because of that, there's a little song that goes along with it, and I am going to sing it. It's to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. And here we go. So I'm going to sing it kind of slowly as I write it. And anytime I write it in this video, I'm going to sing it the song, and you should really sing it as well, even if it's just in your head, because it'll help you remember. Okay? So it goes x equals a negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? So that is the song. So we've got x equals a negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so get used to that because it's going to be um, pummeling your eardrums for the next 20 minutes. Okay, so now we want to see, well, okay, what does this mean? How do we use this? And that's what we're going to practice right now. So first example, we've got the quadratic equation 2x squared minus 6x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, we can see that it's not going to be solved by factoring, and it's also not a 1x term. We have 2 x's, so let's do the quadratic formula. The first thing we do, and what I should see on everyone's work when you turn your work in, or whenever you do this kind of thing, you should always start by writing out A, B, and C. A is 2, B is negative 6, and C is 3. Okay, another thing you should get in the habit of until you learn this really, really well is every question you should rewrite the quadratic formula, just the plain quadratic formula with the letters. It'll help you learn it. So anytime I write it, I got to sing it. So here we go. Here it is again. X equals a negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so there's my formula. Now we know in algebra, it's kind of lovely because all we have to do is we look at our letters and we just plug in our numbers for our letters, okay? That's basically what algebra is, just plugging in numbers for letters. So that means we don't know what x is, so we just write x. X equals negative b. Well, b is negative 6, so negative b is 6 because it's negative negative 6. So that's why some people sing x equals opposite b. That's the same thing. So the opposite of b would be 6. Plus or minus square root. of b squared. Now, one thing you want to be really, really careful of, you always want to put your b inside of a parenthesis. Okay, and here's why. In my calculator, if I take my calculator right now, and if I type in -6 squared, -6 squared, I get -36. But I know that that's wrong. If I'm using my brain and if I do a common sense check, I know that's wrong because negative times a negative is a positive. So -6 times -6 has to be positive 36. So what this means is that if I put it in parentheses, so parenthesis -6 parenthesis squared, then I get 36. Okay, if you don't put the parenthesis, you're not going to get the right answer. So always put a parenthesis. It's just a good habit to get into. Squared minus 4a is 2, so we write 2, and c is 3, so I write 3. Okay, remember in algebra we use parentheses to mean multiply. I know that this means -4 times 2 times 3. Don't put x's in for multiply because x in algebra means a variable that we're going to plug a number in for. So we just write 4 times 2 times 3 like that. All over 2a. 2 times 2. Okay, so now I have all my numbers plugged in. Now I have to actually go through and simplify everything. So I've got to multiply everything out and then simplify. So x equals 6 plus or minus the square root of -6 squared is -6 times -6, that's 36, minus 4 times 2 times 3 is 24, over 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, now just keep on going. X equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 24 is 12. And this number, the number inside of the root, is called the discriminant. Okay, it's called that because it's going to tell us if our answer is imaginary or if it's real. We know, remember, from our last couple videos that if there's a negative number inside of the root, the answer is imaginary. If it's a positive number, the answer is real. So that's why this is called the discriminant, okay? So if you hear someone say something like, what's the discriminant? Well, in this case, it's 12. Also, I can't forget my denominator, 4. Okay, now we need to think back to the previous video where we learned how to simplify fractions that have roots in them. In this case, the number inside the root is 12. So I'm going to come over here and make my prime tree. 12 is 2 times 6, and 6 is 2 times 3. That means that I have x equals 6 plus or minus. So if I put this in the root, it's going to be 2 times 2 times 3. Circle the 2 and that comes out. So I'm going to get 2 root 3 over 4. Then remember, we have our little triangle that we can draw. Bloop. And I can reduce all these by 2 by dividing by 2. So I get x equals 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1, but I'm not going to write it because remember, an invisible 1 is implied in front of that root 3 over 2. And that is the answer. X equals 3 plus or minus root 3 over 2. So I have two answers because the plus or minus, and this is an exact number. It's not a decimal. I don't want a decimal. I want an exact number, and that's what an exact number looks like. Okay? Let's take a look at another example. And you can kind of see these are kind of long problems just because we're doing lots of steps of simplification. So you'll want to make sure when you do these, you have a lot of space. Give yourself a lot of space on your worksheet paper. Okay, number 2, x squared minus 6 equals negative 4x. Okay, so for step 1 here, I need to get this equal to 0. How do I do that? Well, I just move my negative 4x over to the left. X squared plus 4x, because I want to write it in the correct order, minus 6. And again, I just was adding 4x on both sides equals 0. Okay, so x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Now, A, B, C. A is 1, B is 4, C is -6. So the first thing we always do is we write the full quadratic formula. That way it will help us learn it. So remember, the quadratic formula is x equals a -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? I know I'm writing kind of fast, and that C is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. There we go, C. All right, so now we plug in our letters. I don't know what x is, so I leave it as x. X equals -b. Well, b is 4, and remember, we could have also said opposite b. The opposite of 4 is -4. Plus or minus square root of b squared, 4 squared, minus 4 times a times c. And you want to make sure that your square root sign goes all the way. So if you realize your square root sign is a little short, just extend it. That way you don't want to accidentally think that something's outside of the root sign. Everything is in there. Over 2 times a is 2 times 1. Okay, so then x equals -4 plus or minus square root of 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times -6. So -4 times -6 is actually going to be a positive 24. All over 2 times a is 2. Okay, keep on going. So we get x equals -4 plus or minus the discriminant. Remember, the number inside of the root is called a discriminant. The discriminant is 40 over 2. Now I need to simplify my root. Bring it over here. 40 is 4 times 10. 4 is 2 times 2. Those are both primes. And 10 is 2 times 5. So I'm going to get 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. That's going to come out. So I get x equals -4 plus or minus. This one came out, so 2. And then my leftovers that are stuck inside the root sign are 2 times 5, which is 10 over 2. Now, draw your triangle and simplify. Remember, we cannot simplify what's in the root sign because those are leftovers and we have to leave them inside of there. We can't mess with those. But this one, since it was pulled out, we can mess with it. So x equals, well, these all share a greatest common factor of 2, so I can divide them all by 2. -4 divided by 2 is -2. Plus or minus, that becomes a 1, so it goes away. 10 over 2 divided by 2 is also 1, so I'm not going to write that because the 1 is understood. And I get x equals -2 plus or minus root 10. Okay, we have 2 more examples that we're going to look at. Next example, x squared minus 7x equals 0. Okay, now this is a question that only has an A and a B. C is not there because C is 0. So A equals 1, B equals -7, and C equals 0. Now this is one that actually could be solved by factoring, but let's go ahead and solve it with the quadratic formula just so you can see that either way works. So we get our quadratic formula, which we need to sing our lovely song. So here we go. X equals a -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, there it is. And then we plug our numbers in. So x equals negative b. Well, here's b is negative. Remember another way to think of it, x equals opposite b. So that would be positive 7 plus or minus square root of b squared, don't forget to put it in a parenthesis, minus 4 times a times c. I always do this. I make my square root a little too short. All over 2a. Okay, so then I'm going to get x equals 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 times the negative 7 is 49. And then here, anything times 0 is always 0. So this is going to be minus 0, which is just, I'm not going to write that, over 2. Now this 49, it is a perfect square. It is 7 times 7. So this simplifies, and if you're not sure, that's okay, you can do this. 49 is 7 times 7. Those are both primes. If I put them in, 7 times 7, that's a pair. So it's going to come out just as 7. Okay, so x equals 7 plus or minus 7 root 2. Now in this case, I'm not done. This is stuff that these can be combined. I don't have a root sign in the fraction, so I can keep simplifying. So what I need to do now is I need to actually show two different answers to reflect my plus and minus. Another way to think about this is like this. X equals 7 plus 7 over 2, and x equals 7 minus 7 over 2. 7 plus 7 over 2 equals 14 over 2, which equals 7. 7 minus 7 over 2 equals 0 over 2, which equals 0. So my answer is x equals 7 or x equals 0. Okay, let's keep going. We have one more example. Oh, and the reason why I said at the beginning this could have been factored, anytime you get an answer that you actually get a full answer where you don't have a root inside of your fraction, that tells you that it could have been factored. All right, last one. Negative 8x equals negative 16 minus x squared. Okay, we're going to need to get all of these on one side. I prefer to work with a positive x, and I can see that I've got a negative x squared over here. So I'm going to just pull it over that way. By positive x, I guess what I should have said was I like to have my a be positive. So I'm going to pull that over. So I get x squared. This is staying on its original side, minus 8x. I pulled that one over, so that's plus 16 equals 0. A, B, C. A equals 1, B equals negative 8, and C equals 16. Okay, quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so now let's plug in values. We don't know x. I don't see x listed over here, so I just keep writing x. X equals negative b, or opposite b. Well, b here is negative, so I know I'm going to write a positive 8. Plus or minus square root of b squared, negative 8 squared, minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. Okay, now I just start simplifying. X equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 8 times 8 is 64, minus 4 times 16 is 64 over 2. Okay, well, this simplifies to x equals 8 plus or minus root 0 over 2. The root of 0 is 0. So we actually get x equals 8 plus or minus 0 over 2. So we can't add or subtract 0 from 8, but we do need to show that we actually still have two answers. Because remember, anytime we have a quadratic, anytime, we always have two answers because of that plus or minus. So how we would deal with that here is we would kind of pretend we had two different answers. We would say, okay, well, if we have x equals 8 plus 0 over 2 and x equals 8 minus 0 over 2, how would we deal with that? Well, here we would have x equals 8 plus 0 is 8 over 2. And here we would have x equals 8 minus 0, which is 8 over 2. So x equals 4, x equals 4. So we would just say x equals 4, but we would need to know that this is called a double solution. And this is important when we do graphing. Okay? So that is it for the quadratic formula. And I will see you guys another day.